इनको मैं कहना चाहता हूँ, सारे पुत्र लग जाओ पुत्रों।
हमारे दर्जनों नौजवानों को शहीद कर दिया, इससे बड़ा जुल्म और क्या होगा।
Pakistan-occupied Kashmir is burning, and the men responsible sit in Islamabad and Rawalpindi, insulated from the blood on the streets. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif and Army Chief Asim Munir. Their government's answer to peaceful demands for flour, rice, electricity and dignity has been bullets, bans and brute force. People who dare to ask for basic rights are being gunned down in the full public view, pushing PoK to the brink of a civil war between an occupied angry people and an unaccountable military state. For years, Islamabad has looted PoK's resources and silenced its people with a mix of propaganda and fear. But now, that fear has broken. In fact, the most disturbing part is that instead of dialogue, the Sharif-Munir duo has unleashed the army, paramilitary and rangers on unarmed citizens, creating a massacre that may go down as the turning point in the region's history. So in today's edition of From the News Desk, we will take a deep dive into the growing unrest in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir and explain why thousands of people have taken to the streets in protest. We will also tell you about the real reason behind this very anger and the demands of the protesters, and more importantly, the government's response with how this crisis is rapidly becoming a major political challenge for the Pakistani establishment. On June 11th, around 60,000 to 70,000 people assembled to protest at Eidgah ground in Rawalakot. Ordinary residents, shopkeepers, laborers, students and families came together to demand affordable flour, rice, electricity and basic rights that any functioning state is obliged to guarantee. What started as a peaceful protest quickly turned into a bloodbath when Pakistani army personnel reportedly opened fire with AK-47 rifles on the unarmed crowd. At least 16 people were killed and 37 wounded in that single burst of violence, their bodies lying on blood-soaked streets, while survivors screamed slogans like "Ye jo dahshatgardi hai, iske piche vardi hai," pointing straight at the men in uniform as the real terrorists. This was not an isolated incident, mind you, but a continuation of a deadly pattern. Just 2 days earlier, on June 9th, clashes between protesters and Pakistani security forces had already left around 30 people dead and nearly 200 injured in the Pakistani-occupied Kashmir. Local leaders and activists demanded an independent probe, accusing the authorities of ordering live fire on civilians instead of engaging with their legitimate grievances. Yet Islamabad's response was not sympathy or accountability. It was more repression, more force, and more silence from Sharif and Munir. Well, the combined toll of these two incidents, where dozens killed in the span of just days, has convinced many in PoK that Pakistani state now sees its own occupied population as an internal enemy to be crushed, not citizens to be heard. And that is why many activists warn that the territory is now on the edge of a civil conflict between militarized occupation and a desperate, furious society. Now, the protests in PoK did not appear overnight. They are the product of years of economic exploitation and political manipulation. Well, residents first took the streets in 2023 over soaring electricity bills and shortages of subsidized wheat, even though huge amount of hydropower are generated from the project itself in their own region. People ask a very simple question. If electricity is produced in their backyard, why are they being forced to pay inflated rates while the rest of Pakistan enjoys the benefit? Well, alongside this economic strangulation runs the anger over elite privilege. While ordinary people of PoK struggle for jobs and basic necessities, government officials and political favorites enjoy multiple vehicles, free fuel, and layers of personal security, all paid for by the very people now being shot for protesting. In fact, India's foreign ministry has bluntly described these protests as natural consequence of Pakistan's systematic plundering of PoK's resources under an illegal occupation. But one issue that has now become the sharpest flashpoint is the reservation of 12 seats in the PoK Legislative Assembly for refugees settled in Pakistan. Well, these refugee seats were originally justified as a way to represent those displaced by the conflict, But locals argued that they have been turned into a political tool for Islamabad to control the PoK assembly from afar. Protesters say these reserves constituencies allowed Pakistani parties to install loyalists who do not live in PoK, distorting the local mandate and diverting resources away from genuine residents. In fact, a recent Pakistani court ruling upholding the constitutional protection of these 12 seats and effectively blocking their abolition without a complex amendment has only poured fuel on the fire, convincing many that neither the court nor the political class are willing to loosen Islamabad's grip. Now, for many in PoK, the demand to scrap these reserved seats has now become symbolic of a larger fight, not just for cheaper electricity or flour, but for genuine self-representation and an end to what they see as a puppet Pakistani control system. Now, at the heart of this uprising stands the Joint Awami Action Committee, or the JAC, a broader alliance of traders, lawyers, transporters, professionals, and civil society activists that has emerged as one of the main voices of PoK Street. Formed in 2023, the JAC began by organizing protests over flour shortages and power tariffs, but its charter has expanded into a 30-plus point list of demand covering subsidies, government reforms, and most importantly, constitutional changes. Now, the Pakistan-backed PoK administration claims it has accepted most of the demands put forth by this very organization on paper, but ground reality tells a totally different story. In fact, Islamabad has chosen confrontation, banning this very organization under anti-terror laws, arresting its leaders, imposing internet blackouts, and sending paramilitary forces to crush its marches. But in response, the organization's leaders have hardened their stance and publicly vowed no compromise. They have also rejected cosmetic negotiations, insisting that there will be no talks until key conditions are met, which are withdrawal of the ban on the committee, removal of heavy armed security units from civilian areas, release of detainees, and most importantly, justice for those killed by the Pakistani army. The organization had called for region-wide shutdown, indefinite strikes, and has even warned that no election rallies will be allowed until the state honors its committees and respect the people's right. JAC leaders said very bluntly that when they asked for wheat and affordable power, Pakistan answered with bullets and terror. Well, now their message goes beyond economics. They accuse Islamabad and the Pakistani army of treating PoK as a colony whose resources, rivers, and voices can be exploited at will. As funerals turn into fresh protests and family mourn over loved ones killed for demanding bread and electricity, PoK is sending a clear signal to Shehbaz, Sharif, and Asim Munir that the era of silent suffering is absolutely over. With each shot fired into the crowds, Pakistan rulers are not restoring order. They're writing the first chapter of a possible civil war in a region they claim to liberate. Well, with that, it's a wrap on today's edition of From the News Desk. Thank you so much for watching, and I'm Yash Goyal, signing off for Times Now Digital. Until next time, take care and keep watching this space for more such videos.